Welcome back then folks to day 2 of Special Projects Pack number 18, and this one some of you will definitely recognise, at least in spirit, from Gran Turismo's past, and this is a bit of a mishmash. Of course it's not a real vehicle, but it's not also a replica either. It's a vehicle which is somewhere in between. It's inspired by the old Atenza or Mazdaspeed 6 touring car that we used to have in Gran Turismo, which was kind of like a Group 4 equivalent back then, you could say. But then I'm using the Atenza Gr3 road car, which of course doesn't have to be in Group 3, which is a big advantage of it, to kind of turn it into the equivalent of more so the old RX-7 and RX-8 LM race cars, with those more rotary engine side of things. So for this one, it is fairly expensive, because the car itself isn't cheap of course, and the Mazda 787B engine swap certainly isn't. But if you do have one of these already, or if you want to try it, of course, you can do so. Now, in terms of the point level, for something with 850 horsepower, on racing tyres mind you, to be under 700 points is actually not bad at all. So you might well be able to use this as a cash cow if you wanted to at the 700 point level. Now, I haven't tried to do that, but usually with the racing engine swaps, they tend to be fairly good on fuel, so I'm not sure how that one would pan out, but it's worth a try. As you'll notice, it is fairly heavy at 1,500 kilos, and again, the reason why I've done that is both because it allows you to have that very malleable point level, but also because that was kind of a nod to vehicles like the Lister Storm and the Panos in the past of the franchise, where they were heavier than they should be, but that could sometimes be an advantage on point level, for example, at least in Gran Turismo 6, where point level was a thing, and before then it was nothing but a disadvantage really. So as far as the actual parts, there's not a huge amount which you can do to the car anyway. You do of course have the sports hards already fitted. For the club sports section, we've got the power restrictor and the ballast. For the semi-racing, of course, the ECU, the high RPM turbo, the diff. I haven't opted to do the body rigidity. You could if you want to. It gives you, as you can see, a slight advantage on points, but I'll leave it up to you. As far as the racing stuff, the racing silencer, if I recall, I think is already fitted anyway. The racing brakes, suspension of course, transmission, and I've gone for, as I said, racing hard tyres. For the extreme stuff, the handbrake isn't entirely necessary, but I thought, why not? And of course the steering angle adapter for that better turn-in, and for the ultimate section there's nothing there. So it's simultaneously a fairly simple build in terms of what to fit, but also a very, very expensive one at the same time, because the car is what, like 300 grand I think, something like that, and then the engine is something like 2.6, 2.7 million, something crazy like that. So like I said, if you've already got one, that could be handy for saving you a lot of cash. As far as the actual upgrades, like I said, 850 horses, 1,500 kilos, and under 700 points. So potentially a very heavy hitter for a vehicle with racing tyres as well. As far as the suspension, 62mm on the ride height, 5 on anti-roll, 25 and 45 for the dampers, 3.85 for the springs. Not as much camber as you'd probably expect, only 1 degree. A little bit of toe front and back, 0.10 out on the front, 0.20 in on the rear, 10, 30, 20 on the diff, so pretty much no change there. For me, I actually like how it handles just with that fairly standard diff setup, but give it a try and see what you think. A kind of modest, I guess you could say mid-range auto ratio for the gearbox of 310 kilometers an hour. Of course, a car like this is never going to have the craziest top-end speed, even with that kind of power, which again kind of reminds me of the Lister and the Panos and a couple of others, but it can do up around 200, so more than enough for most tracks, and we'll get more so into its lap time at Daytona in a second, because it did actually end up being quicker than I thought it would be. Now, as far as the ballast and all that, I've added 20 kilos just to bring us up to 1,500. I've put that all the way to the back for a little bit closer to a 50-50, 86% on the restrictor. Of course, you don't have to restrict it because this isn't a real vehicle, but I just like the idea of the 850 horsepower point level, or power level, I should say. Front downforce is not adjustable. The rear I've got set to 300. Of course, you can lower that to increase the top end speed, but that will also increase your point level. So again, it depends on what you want to do. And of course over here, what relatively few things are fitted are shown on screen. So without any further ado, we'll jump out to Daytona to talk about what I referenced, which is how quick this car actually is. Now, in terms of actually using this car, it's probably a lot smoother and a lot nimbler than you would expect, given it's got an extremely powerful, very high revving engine in a 1,500 kilo, well, saloon car chassis. It doesn't necessarily sound like the most obvious combination. Of course, it doesn't have the kind of low slung, lightweight advantage of the RX-8 and RX-7 race cars, but it actually works. It kind of feels, I think the way I would describe it is almost like a super evolution version of a DTM touring car, which isn't really a bad idea. That sounds pretty cool to me. Now, in terms of driving it, of course you can spin up the wheels as you can with any car with this kind of power, but it's a really forgiving car, and it doesn't actually feel, at least to me, like it weighs 1,500 kilos either. I would guess more like maybe 1250, 1300 in terms of how it actually handles, so that's not a bad thing either. And to get to that lap time, at least for me, this is about as quick around Daytona as the newest shape Ford GT race car, which is not bad at all. Now, I haven't driven that Ford for quite a while, so I might be quicker in it now, but to even be in that same kind of ballpark, and I believe it might have been within something like a half a second or a second of that lap, that's very impressive for a road-going vehicle that weighs 1500 kilos, regardless of its horsepower, because obviously Daytona is far from being just a straight line track. So this one is probably one of my personal favourites from this pack. I've had it built for a while, but I was waiting to see which pack I wanted to put it in. If you are a fan or were a fan of the Mazda 6 touring car, the Atenza touring car, and if you want like an evolution of that idea, kind of spinning it in with the mythos, the panels and the Lister and the RX-7 and RX-8 kind of all moulded into one, I think you're going to really enjoy this. It might actually be one of your favourites from the week. So give it a try. If you've got one lying around, it is the kind of car that could end up lying around in the garage doing nothing. Hope you enjoy it, and of course stick around for the rest of the builds during the week. But for now, thanks for watching.